beginning, it was a very different environment. Project-based learning, block scheduling, one-to-one computing. We gave kids email in 1996, which was unheard of back then. They had unfiltered access to the internet. And by one-to-one, I mean big desktops with CRTs and lots of noise and humming in the classroom. And so it obviously got a lot of attention. Everyone wanted to see what a school like this was like. So we had so many visitors, and we got labeled a model digital high school by the state of California. And we had to create basically a separate entity to handle the people who wanted to come see it, because our job is busy teaching and we couldn't be giving tours all the time. So we created this kind of foundation, a separate organization, sister organization, to deal with all the external relations. And one of those groups that came to visit was Melinda Gates, who was looking for schools to model as design templates for the model of the next generation of schools. And they picked about 12 different models across the nation, and they basically gave our little foundation, which was designed to give tours, a couple $1 million to say, all right, what we want you to do is to give this money to other schools who want to replicate this work. So basically, people came to us and would like to do a new tech, and we said, okay, well, here's some money to get that started, and we'll provide you with coaching and training. So we spent the whole year kind of figuring out what it was that made new tech work and successful, and then how to replicate that work, how to transfer that knowledge to another school. So the Gates money ran out, and so we became a fee-for-service organization. So that's basically where I'm coming to you from now, is New Tech Network, which is a non-for-profit organization, almost like a consultancy that helps transform education. This is our network of schools right now. We have 160 in 26 different states. We have a couple schools in Australia, which is how we got the 2 countries up there. And if you were to measure our student population as a district, we would be bigger than Seattle. We would be in the top 100 school districts. So we worked with 27 new schools last summer, or this summer. So 27 new came on board last year. And as I described in the last session, it's basically massive holistic systemic reform. What we don't believe in is the piecemeal reform that usually we try to do in education, which is we try to change one part of a system, and the other parts of the system hate that change and try to destroy it. And so as long as you have extra money, or a leader who cares about it, or a teacher who cares about it, that program will exist. But it usually goes away when the money dries up or that leadership leaves. And so what we believe is you have to change all the parts in order to make a new machine, so all the gears and cogs and springs work together, just like a grandfather clock. You can't just change one of those gears. It doesn't fit in the machine. So we come in, and the school closes down in June, and it opens up in August. I got it right this time. You were waiting for it, weren't you? It's a traditional school, and then they open up, and it's project-based learning, one-to-one computing, assessment of 21st century skills, block scheduling, just massive systemic holistic change. And then what we do is provide all the training that allows the teacher to be successful in that new ecosystem. But basically we reinvent the ecosystem for educators. So that's the core of our work. And earlier this morning I talked a lot about project-based learning and how do you scaffold that work and support kids as they learn how to be successful project managers. And this session is really talking about the 21st century skills that kind of the community is craving right now. It's all the lingo that's out there. You can also call it the 4 C's is another phrase for it. College and career readiness skills is another phrase for it. But basically, it's all these soft skills that really aren't measured by the test, but that the rest of the world seems to value quite a bit. And the question often asked is, how do we assess things that are soft and not measurable? But I think we need to take a little bit of a step back and talk about what is it that we're really talking about when we assess 21st century skills. What do we really mean by that? So we have a common dialogue, because what I might say, you might think is something different. So I'll go through how New Tech deals with this. And by the way, this slide deck, as well as a whole bunch of other resources, are in a little folder for this section. And we're going to be accessing that. So if you do have a device, you might want to bring that stuff up. Also, if you don't have a device, you might want to start looking at some of this with Kara will show you a little bit. So this is my daughter. Typical teenager, 14 years old. You can see here she's on 2 devices at once. This is just a candid moment. I didn't stage this at all. I mean, this is our reality. As much as maybe the older generation goes, oh my God, we gotta stop, this is ridiculous, they need to spend time talking to one another. It's, even me as an educator, it's hard to keep them off of these devices. This is the reality they're in. Just to show you, she's also a pretty well-rounded person. She's a ballerina, so she doesn't spend all her time. She spends probably 3 hours a day practicing ballerina, and she's a swim goofball. So all in all, I would say a very typical teenager. And at the heart of this work for me is thinking about what her next steps will be. Where will she be in 20 years? And so this graph, I think, is an interesting one. It shows what happened to the number of people who were farmers, employed as farmers, after the tractor was invented. So we have here in 1800 where 90% of us, it took that many people to grow enough food for the other few doctors and carpenters and all that kind of stuff. 90% of us were farmers. And now it's down to 2.6. Okay? Where did all those farmers go?
Service.
To the city.
They went into the cities. This fed the Industrial Revolution. They came to the cities, they worked in the factories, and then there was, horrible working conditions and the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, so we created unions and all this kind of stuff. And that this whole kind of sector of the economy, plus it freed up a whole bunch of people to be artists and doctors and lawyers and a bunch of other stuff. I believe the same thing is going to happen with technology. It is happening, right? We're probably in this phase of technology. Have you seen the Google cars that drive themselves? Just think of the unemployment in New York City if taxis are now robots, right? Alone. This is what a factory looks like now. What used to take 12 people around that car, now probably takes one person who's monitoring a couple of red lights to make sure that nothing is going haywire. Did you see this? Mm-hmm. This documentary where IBM built a computer to compete against on Jeopardy, and it won. It took it a couple tries. Right? Now Jeopardy is an unusual game. We tend to think it's like one of the hardest, of the game shows. It's up there, right? Compared to Family Feud. Right? This one actually is supposed to be kind of smart to do. So if this computer is spanking these two guys, right? What does smart mean? Like, what do humans bring to the table that a computer doesn't? Right? That's the game for us. And that's for my daughter too. If she cannot compete against a machine on something that has a value add, there is no job for her. Right? If you take that thought far enough, maybe we should all become like pets, like dogs and cats. The computers will just raise us, and our goal will be the cutest, right? Who cares about how smart we are? That's right, the Matrix or something. But I think we have quite a few generations for that to happen. But very, very quickly, we could be going to fast food. It could be completely automated with a computer that works 24/7. Maybe one person in the store managing it. What is it? Adobe talks about Amazon with the deliveries, right? More and more, these machines are being able to do a lot of the stuff that used to be kind of uniquely human. Like it's hard to imagine a car driving itself, but it could be that we're sitting there doing our email while the car is taking us to work. And I don't think it's too far off. Computers grow much faster than humans do. They're doubling every 2 years. Their capacity, right? So what is it that's uniquely human? What are we bringing to the table? So here are some skills that employers are really valuing. At the top, the ability to work in a team environment. How many of you have collaboration in your gradebook? You assess collaboration. In your gradebook, like it shows up and the kid knows. Works well with others for the elementary guys. We got more of that. Okay? So how many high school teachers have collaboration in there? One, right? So here's a skill that's rated almost top, but is hardly being assessed by the upper levels of education. Universities, even less, right? Other things up there, being able to make decisions, solve problems, and this doesn't mean being able to be a calculator and find X, it means complex problems that have no single answer. Question in the back?
Well, wouldn't you say every time you have a discussion in the classroom, you're using collaboration?
I don't think that's how they would do it. I don't think that's how the employers would say that's collaboration.
If you have to use critical thinking skills and respect to other people, we're teaching communication skills in the classroom all the time.
I don't deny at all that there are some elements of a group discussion, or a classroom discussion, that can bleed over into group dynamics, but it's very easy for a big chunk of kids to not be paying much attention in group conversations. And one person can have one opinion and another person can have another opinion, and it doesn't affect the two. When you're two in a group and you have to solve this one problem and only one of the solutions is going to be chosen, it's a very different dynamic than a group where anyone can just express their own opinions and viewpoints.
Oh, no, I think you've got to be working on a project, obviously, there's a goal to the classroom.
Right, so that's the project-based learning piece, right? If you're doing collaborative work, which there's no way to teach collaboration if you're not doing collaborative work. So number one skill, if it's a number one skill, then what percentage of the time are kids doing collaborative work, right? Versus independent work, which isn't as valuable. Bunch of other stuff up there you can see. Very little bit often we teach formally in our class. And I'll even say, like with the group conversations, there are some teachers who keep track of it, and it's usually in a language arts class, but it's probably not happening in science class. It's probably not happening in math class. You know, so oftentimes those kinds of things are being very siloed in specific disciplines. So here's another one, which people always talk, they will be critical of new tech, saying, why are you trying to, solve business problems? Education is bigger than what, your employment is and what the business community wants. Well, here's one that's tied directly to what education values, which is, do you go on to higher education? So this is had data since 1992, and it really hasn't changed much before that, but about half of our students who go to college, go to a four-year college, actually get a degree within 5 years. And that's our top 25%. I'm going to talk about the 75%, right, that didn't go to a four-year college. Top 25% who go, half don't make it. So there's something about the skills required to be a college student that we're not giving students. And I think a lot of it has to do with that self-management and agency piece, where you take a student who has had things due at the end of the period, who's been very controlled, who hasn't had to think much, who's had very, worksheets that don't require a lot of heavy lift to do. You just kind of look for the bold word in the book and transfer it over. We have a lot of that kind of work going on. And then we have bells that tell them where to be. We have people who tell them what courses to take. We have parents who get them up in the morning. We have curfews at night to make sure they're responsible. And then we put them into a college dorm. That's a problem, because there's no structures in the college dorm. It's all self-driven structures. And so there are some skill sets that I don't think we're imparting on our students. I don't think those kids aren't smart enough. They're getting the SAT scores. They're getting the A's and B's in our classes. I think it has to do with them being able to manage themselves. So here's our driving question, slightly different than the morning session. How do we teach and assess the knowledge, skills, and attributes needed for college careers and civic life in a world of rapidly advancing technology, structural shifts in our economy, and a shrinking globe? It's a big question. Yes. And I didn't use the phrase 21st century skills. Right? Regardless of what label you call them, what do kids need to be successful in this next generation? Anyone know why this day is important, this year?
Yeah, I graduated college.
Did you? That was a very important year for you, yes? Yes?
That was the peak of the U.S. economy.
Possibly, don't know.
First personal computers.
That's all great guess too. This was the year Scantron company opened. Right? Once we have this device, wow, I can assess 100, I can actually be done with finals like half an hour after the kids have turned them in. Right? But in order to make it fit on a Scantron, we had to make it, make the questions fit into an A, B, C, or D choice. Right? There is a correct answer. There's no vagueness in there. One of those choices is the correct answer. We could also start to collect massive amounts of data about our schools and what they're doing. This led to the whole testing, which led to the standards movement, right? And the standards, of course, had to be something you could measure with an A, B, C, or D question, right? So the whole thing was driven by this technology because it was the only way we could measure. Now, if we try to measure critical thinking, very hard on an A, B, C, D, E test. It's very hard. So this technology actually changed how we all looked at education and gave birth to the testing movement. So, as I said earlier, most of the behaviors that teachers have are a result of the ecosystem they're swimming in. And so if we don't like the way teachers are behaving, we have to change the ecosystem. We can't just continue to beat up teachers and say you're not doing it right. So let's talk about the things that kids need to know and be able to do to be successful in life. So obviously there's the content, right? There's the math, the science, the history, the stuff that we just want them to know because in order to be an educated citizen, you just have to have some basic awareness. What's changing though, and it's showing up in lots of different places, is that it's going from just pure knowledge and facts, the stuff that you could answer on Jeopardy, to knowledge and thinking. And so this is being represented in the new Common Core. This is being represented in next-gen science standards. Even AP, which I thought the College Board would be one of the last groups to come on board with this kind of stuff. They actually rewrote their biology syllabus. I don't know if any of you are teaching AP Bio, and they're working on the others. But they hired a group of teachers from New Tech to help write curriculum for their new syllabus because it is all about application and thinking about the content rather than just memorization and regurgitation. And so, as imperfect as any of those things are, this is the start of an attempt, this pendulum kind of swinging back to say, actually, we know a computer can know way more than a human ever could. It can cram more information and find it and retrieve it so much faster than we ever could. The question is, can you make sense of it? Can you put it to work? Can you apply it to solving a real-world problem? And that's the things computers have a hard time with, unless you program them very specifically. So this is the shift that's coming as we move away from just pure knowledge, beginning into knowledge and thinking. Next, skills. This is what kind of people call 21st century skills, and there's a list of things up there that people might mention when they talk about 21st century skills. This is the stuff that employers are kind of craving. That they want to see students come to them ready to do. Let's just focus on critical thinking just because that one pops up almost everywhere. How many of you have gone to martinlutherking.org? A couple of you? And so you know the background of it? Kids will very quickly find this page if you're having to do some research on Martin Luther King. The background of this, they did so much better than most organizations. They actually tell you who's behind this website. It's called Stormfront. Normally you have to work kind of hard to get to it. Stormfront is a racist organization. Racist organization. They wouldn't classify themselves as that, but I will, after reading some of the material, right? So the sole purpose of martinlutherking.org is they want to get rid of Martin Luther King Day. They think it's an injustice to have Martin Luther King Day, and so it's filled with propaganda and information that they produce here. So here we have a generation of kids who's been trained, if they read it, it's true. Because we told them, did you find it in the textbook? Right? And we very carefully built libraries of only acceptable materials, right? And we want them to document their sources through MLB standards or whatever standards you're using, right? And yet they could document this and it could be totally wrong, okay? We have to train kids to question the stuff they're reading constantly. And so if we're going to really push kids to be good critical thinkers, It is not about asking them simple questions that have an answer. It's about ambiguity. It's about data that doesn't make sense. It's about unexpected results, alternative realities. We have to get them outside the box of thinking like there is a right answer. Because the real problems we're facing, there's no single correct answer. There's lots of potential correct answers. And we have to weigh all the pros and cons and make a choice. So then the last one is attributes. Knowledge, skills, and attributes is what I put in that driving question. And this is the stuff that there's been an awful lot of research on in the last 4 to 5 years, especially around growth mindset. Are you familiar with any of that? Growth mindset is basically that failure is okay if you learn from it, versus failure is bad. But what they're finding is things like persistence is more important than how much you know. And so grades, your high school grades, are a better indicator of your college success than your SAT scores. Because grades show how hard you work to get that A, and that's actually more important than how much you know when you get to college. And so we clump all these together in this thing called agency, which is a 21st century skill that usually doesn't show up on very many lists. It's something that we believe in. But basically, you put all this together, and this is the ability of the student to be an agent for their own success. To come and ask for help when they need it, to put in extra time, to recognize what they're good at, what they're not good at. All of this is part of that, this category that we call agency. Just a quick little description of the fixed mindset versus growth mindset. If you're in a fixed mindset, you believe that intelligence is largely static. It doesn't change. You're either born smart or born dumb. In a growth mindset, you believe that's elastic and it can be developed. There's really interesting research now about the average IQ of humans. I think the study's done in the US, but it's gone up like 30 points in the last 50 years. I don't think that's evolution. So something must be malleable in this. But if you have a fixed mindset, your goal is to look smart. You don't ever want to expose your vulnerability, be vulnerable. You don't want to expose your failures. You want to look like you've got it all figured out. Where over here, your core drive is to learn and become better and improve. Over here, you're going to avoid challenges because that'll make you look stupid. You want to have easy work. This is the situation where if you ask 3 high school kids to choose between 3 high school US history teachers, and one teacher is way easier than the other, right? Where will the kids go? Easy A, because they're not about getting the knowledge. We've set the game for them. The goal is to get an A, and so it makes more sense to go to the easy course, right? This group gives up easily. They don't see working hard as valuable because, remember, your intelligence is largely static, so why work hard? Right? On this side, they welcome criticism. They want that feedback. They want to improve. They persist despite obstacles because it's not that they don't think, I can't do that. They stay in their head. Their inner voice says, I can't do that yet. Right? So this is, I think, as important of a 21st century skill as all the other stuff. Because the reality is, we're going to be facing change constantly. And so you have to have that adaptability, that persistence, that willingness to learn. If you don't, I think you're in trouble. So you might be asking yourself, oh my God, really? You want me to assess a, quote, frame of mind? What kind of liberal, tree-hugging craziness is this? Really what I'm asking you is to measure what matters. Right? If the research is very clear, saying that these are the things that result in success, then regardless of how fluffy we think it is, we need to figure out how to tackle this. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I'm putting it on you to start thinking about how do I make this work in my classroom. So let's think about grade books here. So this is kind of a mock-up of how we do assessments in New Tech, and let me blow it up for you a little bit. So take a look at this and tell me where this student is struggling. Yeah, that took you about 10 seconds. Now, luckily the elementary people do kind of an assessment like this. I mean, they think about these different categories, right? But as kids get older, we move away from that. When you ask an elementary school teacher, you know, what do you teach? They say, oh, I teach third graders. And they think about the whole child. And when you ask history teachers in high school, what do you teach? I teach U.S. history. It's kind of regardless. It's like the kids aren't even there. I teach U.S. history. They can learn what they want, but that's what I just don't know what they're doing. So in a traditional classroom, you know, let's say my history class, I would get research papers turned in, and little Billy turns in his paper late, right? So what do we tend to do? Dock them points, right? So let's say it was a B+ paper and it's like a week late, so I take off a couple of points, 10 points a day, let's say now it's a C-, right? I put a C- in the grade book. What does a C- mean? What's a C? It's an average. So I have no idea what the skills and abilities of that student are based on that grade. I can't tell if the paper had poor content, if it was poorly written, if it was turned in late because my grade book lets me put in a C and I'm done, right? And then when the C bubbles up itself into a final grade, let's say the kid gets a C in the class, it's just average. Well, I don't know if it was a gifted and talented student who was bored and just not doing the homework and getting a C, or if it was a student who's really struggling and working hard, maybe an ELL student, right, who's struggling and ended up getting a C. Two very different scenarios, both getting the same grade. It's no wonder employers never ask for transcripts. The only people who ask for transcripts are colleges, and they're only looking for A's. So it's very simple for them, right? So this grade book that we use, we actually put in multiple grades. So that same paper that kid turned in would have 4 different grades. It would get a grade in the content. It would get a grade in how well it was written. It would get a grade in the critical thinking or analysis skills. And it would get a grade in work ethic, or now we call it agency. Right? If they turn it in late, which category do I ding?
Agency.
The agency and the work ethic one, right? That one gets hit. Or if it was poorly written, I would ding in a different category. But now, when it bubbles up the grade, since I'm putting in, and then, again, a lot of teachers have a rubric like this, but they only put into 1 grade, right? Because their grade book only lets them put into 1 grade. We put in a separate grade for each one, and so we're categorizing each one of these separately, right? And so eventually it does pop out a grade because we have to. The system needs it. But before that, we're having really deep, meaningful conversations about the student's skills and abilities. Whatever you measure, we get. And so you have to put these up there front and center. So instead of categories like presentations and papers and tests and homework, right, everything a kid turns in is a representation of their skill sets. And so we measure according to each one of those skill sets separately. So homework, where would that go mostly? Yeah, work ethic or agency, right? A test, probably up to American history standards or language arts standards, right?
Yeah.
Questions? Is this making sense?
Just an overall thought about looking at this. If you were to just look at those 8 particular areas that you were assessing, it's only 2 areas of standards. Look at all the rest of them.
Correct.
6 out of 8 are all something completely different than standards.
Correct. That's a good observation.
Did you guys develop your own gradebook program to do this, or is this something accessible to the rest of the world?
Right now it's internal, but you can do it with your own gradebook. Just set up your categories differently.
Yeah, they make us use Aries, it sucks.
Sounds like someone needs to write a letter. But normally instead of your categories being homework, tests, and papers, you can create categories like this. So you can still do it, it's just a little bit of workaround.
So you have 120 students over the course of the day for handing in assignments. You're giving them 4 separate marks.
It depends. Like a homework assignment, I don't even collect. Right? It's work ethic. It's their agency. They're trying. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's not a final assessment. A homework is a horrible assessment of content because you don't know if they copied it, out of the book, if they really understood it. They just, And so I don't want to take that big pile of papers and spend a bunch of time grading something that really has no meaning. What I want to do is get the feedback as quickly as possible to the kids so we go over the homework. But before we do, I walk around and make sure they did it. I check it off and I give them 5, 10 points. It's work ethic, right? So I reduce what I grade and I focus on the big things.
Just a question about the percentages of each strand, I guess, how you determine those, what's the process?
The teachers do that. So this happens to be an integrated course between U.S. history and language arts. So they negotiated these percentages. So it's like if you saw a debate class, you might see oral presentation being 25% or more of the grade in a public speaking class. A math class might have very different weightings.
Do parents get involved in that conversation about how that's proposed?
Not usually.
They have opinions about it?
You know, they have opinions about my traditional grade book. So it's yes, but it's no different than before.
Okay.
Most people, this makes a lot of sense. And I'll tell you, a great story was a student was giving a tour. Remember I said we get a lot of tours. So a student's giving this group of adults a tour, and the adults say, "Why did you volunteer to give us tours?" She's there after school. And the student said, "Well, my oral presentation scores aren't that high, and I'd like to improve my public speaking skills, so I took this opportunity to practice." Right? That's the kind of metacognitive awareness of their skills and abilities that I want them to have. And I can't do that unless I raise the awareness of these skills that are important. Right? Yes?
So when the student gets a paper back, you have all of those grades on the top or whatever, or are you meeting with that student?
Every teacher can do it differently, and sometimes you do meet with them, and there's 1,000 different ways to do that. But basically, we have rubrics, and so it ends up on the rubric.
How do you measure collaboration?
Great question. And we're going to get there real quick. So, parking lot.
This kid is obviously smart. One of his highest scores is critical thinking, and he's got a high work ethic to return his work in on time, but he's got low reading skills and talking, oral communication, written communication. So I'm wondering, maybe he's a second language learner, maybe? How do you...
Exactly.
How did you figure that one out?
I didn't figure it out. The student, their demonstrated skills told me what this was.
So then you would supplement their learning with that.
Exactly. Now I know how to help this kid. Because before, Billy would come to me and say, "Oh, I got a C, but I need to get a B to play in football or to get my car insurance, or my dad's going to grab me," whatever it was. And I'd say, "Billy, you can do this. You just got to work a little harder." And you know what human nature is? Billy's going to work harder in the areas he gets lots of affirmation for. He's not going to work in the areas where he's deficit. And this exposes what the deficit is, allows me, allows the counselor, allows the parents to really, if they want to, drill down and get assistance in that area, just like that student did who couldn't do good oral presentations. Who couldn't do good oral presentations?
Right?
Couldn't do oral presentations well?
I'm also good.
All right. So again, it's about raising the stuff up. We can give lip service to 21st century skills, but unless we raise them up and really start to assess them in meaningful ways and have it show up in a way that matters, which right now is grades, then it's all kind of moot. So after doing this since 2000, we kind of narrowed it down to these 6 big learning outcomes that are kind of our default outcomes. And then individual schools add all sorts of different ones. So we have schools that are passionate about the arts, and so they might have a creativity and art standard, learning outcome on here. We have some schools that have a global theme, and so they might have a global literacy theme in their outcomes. But these are kind of default that we set. Every new school says, here's the default to start with, and then you can add to. So I'm going to start at the top of knowledge and thinking, which has replaced our critical thinking one. One of the things we had a really hard time with is measuring critical thinking without content. That really the only way you can measure thinking is in the context of some sort of content or idea. And so we had to combine those two. So what we did is create a whole series of rubrics, which I've shared with you in that document, on at different grade levels. So we've got 5th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade of how we assess knowledge and thinking, which is that combination of content and and critical thinking or evaluation or assessment. And it's organized by subject area as well. So history has a different one, science has a different one, so they're very honed. We work with a group in Stanford called Scale to develop these. And so these have become the heart of making sure that our curriculum is rigorous, because we're defining very clearly what we want students to know and be able to do on the content and thinking side. So we're going to be looking at those in a little bit. Collaboration, great question. So when we first started, we wrote this neat little rubric on collaboration, and there's tons of them on the web, so I didn't bother putting them in because this one isn't very special, but our process is kind of special. At first, we were kind of walking around the room with our little rubrics, and we were trying to watch them work, and I was, checking off, and it was just a joke. There was just no way you could assess collaboration that way. So we said, well, let's have the kids use the rubric to evaluate each other. So then I would hand every kid 5 rubrics for all their group members, and they would evaluate everybody, and then I'd take that back, and I'd be sitting there for like 2 hours after school trying to sort, okay, here's the 3 for Johnny, and here's the 2 for Susie, and then have to average those scores out, and that was a total nightmare. So then we built this tool, which it's basically the rubric is online, and the kids go and evaluate each other. So at the end of every project, and sometimes when you're doing PBL, you might do it in the middle of the project to give them formative feedback, we have them go online and rate their peers against this rubric. And so our kids are probably getting a feedback on their collaboration skills at least once a week. That's probably about how often a project is wrapping up in one of their classes. Right? Once a week they're getting assessed on their collaboration skills. So again, it's useless to put up this really cool outcome if you're not regularly assessing it. That's not happening all the time. Agency, yes, we do have a rubric for agency. I threw that in there as well, so you can take a look at how we're measuring it and how it looks. And again, I'm not saying that these are perfect rubrics, but you can see what our thinking is and how we're trying to describe something that's very abstract in a concrete way so that we can measure it. And I'll say this as well, that I can't even imagine a situation where you would take this rubric as it is and sit down with the kid and evaluate their agency skills. Here's what we do, is, okay, for this project, we're really going to focus on building your confidence. And so I'm going to be looking for evidence of confidence during this project. And I put only this one line into the rubric. Does that make sense? And then the next project, I might pick something else. And so that over time, you build up a comprehensive assessment of their agency skills. But I don't just, every single project, assess this whole thing. The same thing goes with the knowledge and thinking rubric. We pull out language and put them into a rubric, into our project rubric. And we put it in the context, right? So these are the master templates that exist as the big picture of what we want to do. And then within our projects and within our curriculum, we pull out the pieces that we want and put them into our project rubric. Is that too complicated? No? Okay.
Not simple, actually.
Yes. So I want to give you a little bit of time just to explore those. And so what I'd like you to do is, if you have a device, go ahead and download and find something that's in your subject area, something that you're passionate about, or if you want to look at the agency one, you can do that. And have a conversation share what you're finding with your neighbors. And I want you to use this sentence starter. I noticed that blank, and that makes me think about blank. Okay? And then I'm going to pick 3 people at random to share out something. Okay? That's when the people start leaving the room. Okay? So if you can find someone who's got a piece of technology, we're only going to do this like 5 minutes.